Each week I'll provide an overview of what happened in the previous week during the campaign for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion. There are two exceptions to that format. Okay, that's better. Right, you'll hear about the Electoral College's origins. You'll hear about how its members are selected, the delegate selection, and you'll hear about exceptions, and you'll hear about the college's role in electing the president. So in the 2016 election, Democratic Party candidate Hillary Clinton, probably the most highly qualified and highly suited candidate for the presidency, won 65,853,514 votes. Her opponent, probably the least qualified, the least suited candidate for the presidency, won 62,984,828 votes. And for those of you that do maths at the speed that I have and haven't worked out the difference yet, it's 2.8 million. So Hillary Clinton won 2.8 million, nearly 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. Now, despite that, she still lost because she didn't win the Electoral College. It was the fifth time the loser of the popular vote won the Electoral College and the presidency, but they won the popular vote, but they didn't win the Electoral College. And if you don't win the Electoral College, you don't win the presidency. So let's just have a quick look at this table. So back in 1824, and this is worth a kaleidoscope at least on its own, because this character, Andrew Jackson, was a Trump-like character. And I had the honour in 2016, at about this time actually, in 2016, of being in the US and going and listening to a talk about Andrew Jackson and his quest for the presidency. And as I say, he was a Trump-like character, anti-establishment, a lot of the things Trump is. So he won 41% of the popular vote, but John Quincy Adams, that won 30.9% of the vote, won. Now the reason was, and we haven't got time to go into the detail, was there was a deadlock in the Electoral College. The Constitution provides for the House of Representatives to elect the President if such a deadlock exists, and the House of Representatives went with the establishment candidate, John Quincy Adams, who was the son of the second President, John Adams. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. And then we've got, some other examples here and here. And then this example in 2000. In 2000, I believe, the president was not elected. There was an election, but George W. Bush was not elected. He was appointed by the Supreme Court, and it had a Republican majority. And I think that's where Trump wants to head. But we'll talk more about how that might happen as we go on. And that in itself is another story. And one of the unknown parts of that story, or that's not so well known, is that the Greens candidate took votes from Gore. Had the Greens candidate not run, Gore would have won. And the world today would be a different place. And there's another spoiler today, the Greens candidate, Jill Stearns. She's threatening to do the same thing, and Trump has said that he loves her. Because he said she gives 100%. So, meaning votes. So, sometimes you've got to put aside your political philosophy for a bigger picture. So the US constitutional founders did not invent the Electoral College. They borrowed the concept from Europe, where it had been used to pick emperors for hundreds of years. When the United States adapted it, other countries followed. Chile in 1828, Argentina in 1853, Finland in 1925, and this might surprise you, France in 1958. All four of them abandoned it, didn't keep it. The United States is the only country in the Western world, in the democratic world, that has an electoral college that elects the president. So like most things in politics, the Electoral College was a compromise. The 1787 Constitutional Convention delegates considered a few models for the selection of the head of state and government. One delegate said the problem was one of the most difficult of all we have to decide. There was disagreement about how the head of state and head of government should be selected. But there was agreement about what the delegates did not want, and that was a role in which the incumbent could abuse their power and become an absolute ruler. The War of Independence had been about establishing a new structure of government, not based on the British model that had at its apex a monarch who had unchecked power. The constitutional delegates considered three options. One was having Congress elect the president. But that didn't succeed because of a conflict of interest between Congress and the president. You see, Congress makes the laws. The president's administration implements the laws. And some delegates thought that this would contravene the principle of the separation of powers. Remember, the president is the head of government as well as the head of state. That's why we hear about the Biden administration, the Obama administration. Right? They are responsible for implementing the policies of the president and the Congress. So Virginia delegate George Mason viewed making the executive the mere creature of the legislature as a violation of the fundamental principle of good government. Another model was to give the states selection power, but that didn't gain support because some delegates thought the states could not be trusted with such power. A third option was for people to directly elect the president. Well, there were two objections to that. First, the southern states thought the more populated northern states would dominate, and I must say, during our constitutional convention here, Tasmania and South Australia were particularly concerned that their interests would be swamped by the other states that had a much bigger population. So you can understand where those southern states were coming from. Now second, and this might surprise you, some delegates thought there had to be a check on the power of the people. Thomas Jefferson, one of someone who I'm sure we all know, one of the founders of the Constitution, one of the greats of American history, thought there had to be a check on who he called well-meaning but uninformed people. But I'd like to challenge you. Is there some truth in that? Mason, who said that allowing voters to directly pick the president would be akin to referring a trial of colours to a blind man. James Madison said the final decision on how to elect the president was produced by fatigue and impatience. The delegates debated how to elect the president for 21 days, and they had more than 30 separate votes on the subject. That's how they produced the Electoral College. Their reasoning was neither public ignorance nor outside influence would affect the choice of leader. Let's think about that because that's relevant today. The outside influence of the Russians we saw in the 2016 election, I'm sure happened in 2020 and it's happening again this time. Electors would ensure that only a qualified person would become president. The electors would be a check on the public that could be misled, especially by foreign governments. So, I'll leave you to judge if they succeeded. Now, on our second point, the Electoral College selection. How do these Electoral College delegates become delegates? Well, there are 538 Electoral College members. That is the number of House of Representatives members and Senate members combined. Okay, so you're with me? Each state has 2 senators, just like we have 6, except for the territories that have 2 each. And the House of Representatives seats spread throughout the country, there's 435 of them. So them added together adds up to 538 Electoral College votes. So Virginia has 2 senators and 11 House of Representatives members. That gives it 13 Electoral College members. The House of Representatives members are based on population, just like ours are. But unlike ours, there's a gerrymander. There's a gerrymander because the legislature determines the boundaries. We were just talking about a moment ago about a conflict of interest and good principles of government. Well, this isn't one of them. And we're lucky enough here to have electoral commissions that are at arm's length from government that determine electoral boundaries. But it's not so in the United States. Nevertheless, those boundaries are based on largely population. So the bigger the state, the more House of Representatives members, the more Electoral College delegates. So Texas has 2 senators, like all the other states, 38 House members and 40 Electoral College members. So you're all with me on that so far. So now we know the number of delegates, which the Americans call a slate. So now we know how the slate is, how many there are, and how the number is determined. Let's see how the slate is selected. Now, in some states, and look, the United States is, there are so many exceptions and differences. There are 51 states, and it's like there's 51 different ways of arranging their electoral arrangements. But in some states, as I said, state party conventions nominate and vote for their slate. In other states, the party's administrative committee votes for delegates. Some party leaders or people who have a personal or political affiliation with the party's presidential candidate become members of the slate. In other words, the political elite are slate members, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. On the general election day, the people vote for their preferred candidate for president. And you can see here the states and their electoral college numbers. Now, keep in mind California here and over here at New York, right? 2 big states, democratic states. And you can see these blue states are where the Democrats' support is. The red states are Republican states. And you can see they're all quite small numbers there, but those little numbers all add up. So, when the election's held, each electoral college delegate pledges to cast their vote for the candidate that wins the most votes in their state. So it's not like our system. Not like our system. It's first past the post. So if Kamala Harris gets 110,000 votes in one state and Donald Trump gets 109,000, she wins the state. She gets all the electoral college delegates. Everyone follow that? Yeah. And this is why there's a difference, can be a difference between the popular vote and the electoral college. Now, you might ask what happens if an electoral college delegate doesn't fulfil their pledge to vote for the candidate who did not win the most votes. Well, that has happened. Slate members who don't vote for a candidate that won the state are called faithless electors. And there's been 156 of them since the inception of the Electoral College. But they haven't made any difference to the result. And I'll just tell you that the most recent time when that happened was in 1976, when the Republican Party candidate was President Gerald Ford and the Democratic Party candidate was Jimmy Carter. a Washington State Electoral College delegate voted for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was not on the ballot, but he had challenged Ford for his party's nomination in 1976, and obviously that faithless elector was making a statement about what he thought about Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. 32 states and the District of Columbia legally require their Electoral College delegates to vote for the candidate who won the popular vote. So it's a legal requirement. The other states do not have such laws. And those 32 states that have those laws, that's been introduced relatively recently. So, there are two exceptions to that rule, and they are Maine and Nebraska. Maine has 4 Electoral College votes and Nebraska has 5. Now these two states can split their slate of electors with 1 electoral vote for the winner in each of the House of Representatives districts and 2 more for the overall state winner. So Maine has 2 House members and Nebraska has 3. So on the 5th of November, if Kamala Harris wins Maine's 2 House districts, but Trump wins the statewide vote, then Maine's Electoral College would be 2 for Harris and 2 for Trump. Everyone follow that? Besides Nebraska and Maine, no other state has that system. All right? So in Tasmania, let's say that the overall vote was 50.1% for Labor, overall, altogether, and 50% for Liberal. Labor's 1 point ahead. Labor gets all the Electoral College votes. But let's say the good people of Clark, which many of you are, let's say instead of voting Labor, you voted Liberal. Well, then you would get an Electoral College vote for that. So that's how Maine and Nebraska work. Now, the potential for the undemocratic possibility of a candidate winning the popular vote, but not the Electoral College, is not the only anomaly in the US presidential election system. And it's because of population. Political scientist Lawrence Lessig says the vote of a citizen in Wyoming is 4 times as powerful as the vote of a citizen in Michigan. The vote of a citizen in Vermont is 3 times as powerful as a vote in Missouri. This denies Americans the fundamental value of a representative democracy, equal citizenship. At 1 p.m. on the 6th of January, members of the Senate and House of Representatives will meet in a joint session to tally the votes in the Electoral College. The Vice President presides over the meeting and opens the votes from each state in alphabetical order. 4 tellers count the votes, and the Vice President then announces the name of the next president. Now, before we start our discussion, let's have a quick look at the polls. There are 3 points to keep in mind about opinion polls. First, national polling. There are many national polls. Most of them show Kamala Harris ahead, and I don't put too much store in that. Because the ones we'll be watching, the national polls that we'll be keeping an eye on, although I don't put a lot of store in it, and I'll come to why in a moment, is that The Economist magazine's polls and 270 to Win. Now these polls show the likely popular vote, but as we know, that doesn't guarantee winning the presidency. And that could happen on the 5th of November. Now second, the battleground states polls are a stronger indicator, because in the battlegrounds, that's where it's going to be won or lost. However, as CNN's senior data reporter, Henry Enton, has said, the average margin of error in polls in battleground states since 1972, the average margin of error is 3.4 points. Harris isn't ahead by that much in any of the battleground states. Now, he also said that 5% of errors are more than 9.4 points. So, 5% of errors are more than 9.4 points. Now, 5% is not a very big amount, but 9.4 points is. So, the reason I'm telling you this is to be wary of polls. You know, people get very excited that she's ahead. Isn't it great? Well, no. What's the poll that's saying that she's ahead? And where was that poll taken? How many people? So the third point I'd like to make is only two polls predicted Trump's 2016 victory. And they were the University of Southern California's Los Angeles Times poll and the Technometrica Institute of Policy and Politics, TIP, in partnerships with the publications of these logos, Investors Business Daily and the Christian Science Monitor. They were the only two polls that said Trump would win. Now, these are the battleground states polls that we'll be keeping an eye on because they provide an average of the polls. So what these organisations do is look at all the polls, put it all together and get out an average. Now, these are the battleground states and their number of electoral college votes. So we've got Wisconsin that has 10 electoral college votes, Michigan, Pennsylvania. This is called the Rust Belt. This is where Trump got a lot of support in 2016. This is where people in these states have suffered from globalisation, where factories have closed, unemployment and drug taking is rampant. So it's not a prosperous, booming area. So down here, Nevada is another battleground, Arizona, and Georgia. We'll come back to Georgia in a minute, North Carolina. So you can see here, these are not huge numbers. When you look at California's 54, California's got 54 electoral college votes. New York State has got 28. But when you add all these together, that's where the difference comes. That's where it's won or lost. And yeah, Georgia is one to watch. So you can see each party's safe seats, safe states really. So the Republicans dominate through here and the Democrats dominate the coasts. Now, of course, Texas and Florida down here, Florida and Texas, they both have big populations, but the important point here is the Democrat vote is concentrated in fewer states than the Republican vote. As I've said, that's unhelpful when it comes to the Electoral College. So if you think about the Electoral College as a horse race, only one horse can win a race, but the margin by which it wins can be a nose. It still wins because its nose is ahead, or 25 lengths. The Democrats' problem is their horse is a 25-length horse, right? They still win the state, but they win it by so much, they get so many more votes that they don't need. Like the Republicans, the states that they tend to win, the margin's not as great. It might be a length or a couple of lengths to continue our horse racing analogy. So is everyone with me there? So you can see why the direct popular vote can be more than the Electoral College vote. We're all clear about that? Right. Now, according to a 11th of October TIP poll, Americans' top priorities, now, and let's think about the things we're concerned about: democracy, megalomania, autocracy, fascism. The economy is Americans' top priority. 43% say it is. Immigration and border security, 36%. Trump's done a good job by making that an issue. Abortion, 19%. Women have got to vote, especially Democratic voting women have got to get out and vote, because as you know, there isn't compulsory voting. Gun violence and gun control, 17%, and healthcare, 17%. Now, let's have a look at who voters think would perform better on these issues. Now, the list here doesn't completely align with the one that you've just seen, but the first two do. Growing the economy, Trump, 49%. So 49% say Trump would do a better job than Harris in managing the economy. Immigration and the border, Trump, 49%, Harris, 48%. This won't surprise you. Implementing a strong foreign policy, 50% said Trump would, 46% said Harris would. Lowering the national debt, Trump 46%, Harris 44%, and reducing crime, Trump 48%, Harris 46%. So they're all pretty close, aren't they, except for the foreign policy one, which is a bit of a worry. So one of the criticisms made of Kamala Harris was her lack of media interviews. And I'm saying that was something that concerned me too, because if you're not prepared to talk to the media, you're not prepared to talk to the people. The media are a conduit to the people. I used to teach media relations and tell people that it doesn't matter what you think of the individual that's interviewing you or the organisation from which they come. The important point is you are talking to the people, listening or watching what you are saying. So in the second week of October, though, just recently, Kamala Harris did a media blitz. She was on ABC's The View, which is a morning program and a panel of women that discuss topical issues. She was on CBS's 60 Minutes. We'll come back to that. The Call Her Daddy podcast. Yeah, I had a problem with that. And The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. A lot of them, The Late Show, the Call Her Daddy podcast and The View were pretty friendly, but not so 60 Minutes. Now, there's a presidential election tradition that the two candidates do an interview each on 60 Minutes. Harris did, Trump hasn't. Trump said he wouldn't get a fair run. Ms. Harris was scheduled to be interviewed by a Fox News reporter today, our time. I think it was about 11 o'clock. Fox News, as you know, well, calling it Fox News is a joke. It's the propaganda arm of the Republican Party in the same way that Murdoch's News Limited is the propaganda arm of the Liberal and National parties here. Now, finally, before we get going on some discussion, a couple of graphs. This one shows who Americans think will win. So you can see here, in October, 44%. Right, so that's gone up steadily, and that looks quite good, doesn't it? So 38% of most people think Trump will win, but 44% think Harris will. So, and you can see Harris support has steadily gone up since July rather, when she got the nomination. So she was at 35 then, and she's gone up to 44. Now, another question the same pollsters asked was, who do you think your neighbour would vote for? So you can see here, it's almost reversed. Kamala Harris, 38%, Trump, 42%. Well, people obviously think that Kamala Harris will win. Like individually, they're saying that, but they're saying, well, if I put myself aside, if I think about most people I know, I reckon Trump will. I think that's probably the thinking. So even though they think, yeah, it's illogical, I know. It's an interesting anomaly. And just very quickly before I finish, I just want to mention Georgia and a guy whose first name escapes me, but his second name is Raffensperger. Raffensperger is a defender of democracy. He was the man who stood up to Trump. He was the electoral official who stood up to Trump when Trump rang him in 2016 and said, "Find me 11,700 votes," and he wouldn't. His position is an elected one, and he was re-elected just recently. But there's a board of an electoral board in Georgia. So each little state has its own rules and its own little nuances. 3 of the 5 members of that electoral board are Trump supporters and deny that he lost the 2020 election. That board has to sign off on the vote. Do you think they're going to sign off? Not in your life. So that's why I think the drama will begin on November the 5th. This isn't over. And since 2020, there has been a concerted effort by the Trump party. I'm not going to call it the Republican Party anymore because it isn't. There'd be no place in the Republican Party for great Republicans like Eisenhower, like Mitt Romney, who's retiring recently, like John McCain. Don't necessarily agree with all those men's politics, but they were decent human beings who supported democracy. The Republican Party now, the Trump Party, does not support democracy. I know this is our big concern, but as you can see here, for Americans, it's not so not. So, let's hear from you. We've got a couple of microphones, but I'd ask you, because we want everybody to hear what... And can I get a volunteer to help me do this? Oh, Alison, it's very kind of you. Or you want to do that side there. Great, thanks very much, Alison and Ian. Right, but before we start, there are just some rules. So when you raise your hand, ask a question, wait to get the microphone. Ian and Alison will switch the microphone on for you so it'll be ready to go. But hold it towards you, fairly close to your mouth. If you hold it too far away, we won't hear the question. And we all want to hear your question and discussion. So, I think Maria or Alison. Oh, and then Maria.
You can hear me, I presume? It seems an anomaly to me that the Republican Party could accept a convicted criminal and also someone who was instrumental in the attack on the Capitol building. Has the Republican Party just lost the plot? That's the question.
Well, the short answer to the question is yes. The longer answer to the question is power. So Trump had power over a lot of Republicans, a lot of people, and I think what happened was he blocked people from getting elected to positions to demonstrate his power. So if you're not on my side, forget a political career. I think that happened, and I think a lot of those people are culpable. They are culpable in a crime. And none of them, stood up to him.
Well, my question relates to the legislation or how the college is formed. I understand it's not part of the Constitution, but is it a vote by the Parliament to establish the college? And if that's the case, can it be changed from the college system?
No. So did everyone hear that question about the Electoral College? No. The Electoral College is part of the Constitution. So to change it, there'd have to be a change to the Constitution. So it's not legislated, in the way that legislation could be changed to change the system. The Americans were quite conservative in making sure things were written down. And look, our constitution's a bit the same. As we all know, it's very hard to change, especially when the discussion is flooded with lies and misinformation. Anybody else? Yeah, Maria.
Thanks, Neil. Could you just briefly remind me about gerrymandering?
Yeah. And there's a lady down here, Alison, in a black dress who's just putting up her hand now. So you all heard Maria's questions about gerrymandering, and we all do we all know what gerrymandering is? Yeah. Yeah, we do. You don't need me to explain gerrymandering.
That's what I asked.
Oh, right. Well, look, basically what it is designing electorates or districts, constituencies, whatever you want to call them, to favour a particular party. So what happens is that the state legislatures in the US determine the electoral boundaries. So the Republicans, and Democrats do the same. When they get in office, they change the boundaries. There are amazing shaped districts where you concentrate the Democratic Party vote and maximise the Republican Party vote by, where people live. Whereas here we have an electoral commission that determines that on a population basis and on a fair and just basis. There, it's, where can we get the most votes? Well, if we siphon off Sandy Bay, Taroona and Kingston, we might maximise the Labor vote. Do you see what I mean? So that's how that works. So the House of Representatives would look different if there wasn't that gerrymander. And there was a gerrymander in Queensland for many, many years, where Joe Bjelke-Petersen ruled on about 21% of the vote. Yep. And it wasn't until Labor got in that changed. So you can't call that democracy. Anybody? Yes. Oh, sorry. You were next.
I just had a question about the numbers. You said there were 32 plus DC have to follow the popular vote. To Maine and Nebraska do a different thing. What about the other 16? What do they?
Well, they all have
16 different options. Or?
No. They all have first past the post as well. They all have first past the post as well. So all Maine and Nebraska have this split system, and they're the only ones that do. But every other state has first past the post. The 32 states that I mentioned that have legislated that it's the law that the Electoral College delegates have to vote for the candidate that wins the most votes. And in other states that don't have that, they pledge to do that. Now, it's possible that an Electoral College delegate could say, a Trump supporter could say, well, the vote was rigged, so I'm not voting. So if Kamala Harris wins a state, they could say, well, I don't, the vote was rigged. And there are people, the Trump party has trained people in this. In Australia, we have scrutineers, I've done it myself, where on election night, while the votes are being counted, you can be there and watch how your candidate's going and then ring them and say, it's looking great, you're excited, or it's bloody terrible. But in the US, the Trump party has trained people to go in and scrutineer to make sure it's a fair vote. But you can bet that they'll be intimidatory. They won't be, fair. Sal.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Right. We basically had a gerrymander here in Tasmania at one stage when Gordon on the west coast had 5,000 votes and Pembroke had 29,000 votes. So,
yes, that's an example.
Now, one of the things that amazes me is the gun violence one and the low percentage of people that actually bring that to the fore.
Yeah, well, that's an example. That's another story, and we've got some questions down here. Oh, another one here, right. Look, that is an example of the outstanding success of the National Rifle Association, the NRA, to convince people, how important gun ownership is. My partner's sister has a gun, a little pistol, because she has to protect herself. It's not like, we don't understand in Australia that, Americans need to protect themselves. So that's the attitude. And also, this nonsense about the Second Amendment and it being a constitutional right. Yes, it is the law that you can bear arms, absolutely. But when that law was written back in the 1700s, there were militias everywhere. There was an argument for being armed. And if you were armed, it took, about a week to load your gun, organise it, point it, and, right, not machine guns that just go and, you're dead. So I think that has become embedded, that notion of the importance of gun ownership has become embedded in the psyche of Americans in the same way that they think they live in a democracy. I mean, Americans I know are shocked that we have a governor that doesn't have any power, doesn't have any legislative power. I mean, and she's not elected. She or he's not elected. So how democratic is that?
Just wondering if you've got any comments about Alan Litzman's system of predicting the winner of the election.
Yes.
He's the guy who predicted 11 of the last 13 elections or something.
Yeah, was he, that's ringing a bell, he was the guy who has written books about how, this fellow that the lady's mentioning says, forget the polls, forget all the other indicators, all you need to do is look at these, I think there are 10 keys or 13 keys. So there are 13 keys to the White House. And if you get a majority of them, you'll win. And and those keys are like, has there been a war? How's the economy doing? There are particular measures, and the candidate that ticks the most measures will win. That's his prediction, and I think he's predicting Kamala Harris. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's me.
Yes. Now, at last.
So I'm retaining to this gentleman's first question, where he talked about Trump being, a criminal, and we know he did the whole insurrection and so on. I was interested to understand about the qualifications you referred to really early on, that the Electoral College thought that it would mean that you had a qualified person as the president. How do they actually assess qualification?
Yeah.
Is there any judgment? Is there any system that actually judges it?
No. So it's completely no. There's no. The only qualification is that you are born in the United States and you're 35 or older. They're the only two qualifications. So sadly, there aren't. But as we know, there's been some pretty badly qualified people who have become the president, Trump not being the only one. But I think what the important thing for us to understand is I think we need to take ourselves out of our shoes and our concerns. We're talking about a convicted felon and that horrifies us. But for Trump supporters, that's all rigged. That's all yet another example of the establishment trying to put him down. They hate him, they want to get rid of him because he's not part of the establishment. He's not part of the usual game. So they don't care that if he commits crimes. He doesn't care if people hate him. He doesn't care if people don't like him. He just wants to expand his base and get enough votes to win. Who was next? Yes, sir.
A few years ago, there was an article in the New Yorker that said, on my recall, that over the last 20 years, the art of politics in America is not getting out for people to vote for you. It's making sure people don't get out to vote for your opponents.
Yeah. And
to discourage people is now through negative advertising is enormously effective in just getting people to show up.
Yeah.
To stay home. The couches are gone.
Yeah. So everyone heard that comment. Well, I think that's the case. I think that the Democrats, I think we could say, want to get the vote out, but the Republicans don't. And in southern states, Republican state governments have made it so difficult for people to vote, particularly people of colour. And, you know, you turn up to vote. When we turn up to vote, and the electoral officer looks down the roll and finds our name and ticks our name. Well, in the US, it could be, well, my name's Neil Spark, but there could be another Neil Spark who has served a prison term, so he's not eligible to vote. So they just say, well, you're not on the roll, can't vote. So there's a whole lot of little sneaky things that the Trump party has done. But before Trump took control of the Republicans, they were doing that. These people do not support democracy. And the frustrating thing is that most of their supporters, their leadership don't support. Trump doesn't give a stuff about people who are supporting him, people who are on low incomes, who are trying to get ahead. Couldn't care less. And he's not going to, we all know he's not going to do anything for them. But his appeal is that he's anti-establishment and he's something different. Yes.
Do you think that there's a point when gerrymandering may not work? I mean, the abortion issue is massive in America. So maybe, is there a point where maybe the gerrymandering, if you go too far,
yep,
the Republicans will say, hang on a minute, I'm not doing it this time in my life, I'm going to change. So is there any point when you can push an issue too big that gerrymandering won't work, do you think?
Well, look, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not not convinced, because with the abortion issue, and I don't have in my head at the moment the figures, but I do know that most Americans support abortion. Most of them do. There's a big disconnect between what the people think and what the authority is, particularly the Supreme Court are saying. So I think that maybe there would certainly be a large number of people who think this has gone too far, men and women, and hopefully they'll get out and vote for Kamala Harris, just on that basis, hopefully. But I don't know. I'm not sure what the effect of that will be.
Can I got the microphone? Can I have a question?
You can indeed.
It's more of a commentary, I suppose.
Yeah.
With modern technology, we are all experiencing fake news, even on our valued ABC. How do you think America is handling the input of fake news?
Well, I don't think it is, and I think there's been a huge division between the news. And I was just actually started reading a piece that was in The Conversation yesterday about journalism not being, you can't be balanced anymore. We're beyond that time. So when I trained as a journalist longer ago than I'm prepared to say, It was all about getting a balance. It's not about what I thought. It's about getting the story, what other people thought, and testing what it said. So if someone made a claim, you would check it to make, is that true or not? The situation we're in now, thanks to the Republicans and its publicity arm Fox News, is a deep, deep divide. When we were in the US in 2016, my partner's cousin said to me that he was getting 3 news sources: Fox News, MSNBC, which is pro-democratic, and I think CBS, which was sort of fairly central. And he said, it is like I'm reading about 3 different elections, the way that it's reported. So I think that the fake news is something that has been, it has really been extrapolated by social media. And we thought, isn't it great? We can all be journalists now. I can get my point of view out there. Well, the trouble with that is you get people who are liars, people who provide unchecked information, and people who are bad actors, people like Russians who are using social media to infiltrate and to try and persuade people. And the gentleman's comment here about negative ads working, yeah, they do. They certainly do. And that's why the politicians keep using it. Yes, Adela, what would you like to share?
Just the mechanical process of casting a vote. Here it appears to be quite old-fashioned. We go in and we sign, we tick put a cross or whatever on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Americans have a system where it's more computerized, shall we say. Is that leading to people being able to read the vote a great deal more and to less scrutiny?
Look, the answer to that is that each state has a different voting, different mechanics of voting. So in some states there might be the old-fashioned way like we've got. In other states, in Florida, for instance, in 2000 they used what's called shards, where you had a piece of cardboard and you put it in a machine that would punch a hole by the name of the candidate you wanted. And there was a lot of argument about the accuracy, of that. So it varies from state to state. As far as the election being rigged, look, accusations about elections being rigged have been around for as long as presidential elections have. There were questions about Kennedy's election in 1960. When LBJ first ran, there was some interesting votes that seemed to go missing. So I think that there's always been that element, but I don't think it's to the extent that that Trump is saying, and I don't believe that that's the case, and I believe that the officials who are there who are trying to do this are trying to do the best job they can, but they're being vilified. But does that answer your...
Yeah.
Right, anybody else? Last question.
How much has Trump stacked the Supreme Court?
Well, completely. And this is look, we only got a few minutes left, but this is an egregious thing that happened, and a few people had a hand in that. So Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court judges. The president, on paper, the power that he has isn't as great as you'd think. Not as great as you think. But one of the things that he can do is appoint judges to the Supreme Court and the lower courts. Donald Trump appointed more judges than Barack Obama. Trump, between 2016 and 2020, appointed nearly twice as many judges, I think, than Obama did in his 2 terms. So we've got Trump judges, throughout the federal system. Trump appointed 3 on the Supreme Court. One of those vacancies occurred when Justice Anton Scalia, I think his name is, died, and moments after that was announced, The Republican leader, majority leader in the Senate, said we will not confirm a new Supreme Court judge because we're in an election year. We will not do it. Obama still had almost a year to go. He was denied. When another Supreme Court justice died in an election year in 2020, Mitch McConnell said, no, we'll confirm a new judge. Now, that contradiction, these are the things that damage democracy. This is why the Supreme Court ended up being having a Trump majority. And a justice that I admire immensely, Justice RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she's responsible too. She should have retired when Obama was in mid-term. You know, and there couldn't be any argument. And she was in her 80s. She'd served well, but she hung on. And of course Trump won, and we know what happened. And that has changed America for generations. The Supreme Court's passing a whole lot of, making a whole lot of judgments that we don't know about, that go way beyond abortions, that undermine the environment, people's rights, so it goes on. One of them, Clarence Thomas, he wasn't a Trump appointment, but he's a Republican appointment. Well, it's been exposed that he's been accepting gifts from people, going on holidays. His wife was talking to people in the White House on the day of the insurrection. She participated in the insurrection. She's the wife of a Supreme Court judge. So it's pretty bad. And that's why I'm just finished now, when I was there in 2016, intelligent friends of my partners said, look, what do we do? We're not going to vote for her. There's a hatred of Hillary Clinton that I can't understand. And when we don't want to vote for him. And I'm thinking, God, if you don't vote for Trump, you're voting for Trump. So people just didn't seem to, they didn't seem to get that. And I said, look, Hillary Clinton's got her faults for sure, absolutely. But the power to appoint Supreme Court judges is such an important thing on its own, would be enough reason to vote for Hillary Clinton. Anyway, let's finish there. I hope today hasn't been too exhausting, and I look forward to seeing you next week.